Okay, so I think we can start. On this lovely day to listen and to our two industry experts on how to implement the DCT and the road to success. So in a nutshell, what we will be seeing today is what the agenda is a new era for clinical research. What does this mean? So why implementing a DCT? What are the reasons behind it? Also, the questions that you need to ask yourself before starting a DCT. Also, what the challenges are. And finally, who are we, as Evidentic? And finally, we will close the session with some Q&A. The session will also be recorded, so you will be able to see it and stream it afterwards. Also some additional session logistics. You can play this webcast in full screen by pushing the icon on the right bottom corner on the screen. Again, this session is being recorded, so please also feel free to use the chat box that is private to send us any questions you might have, and that we will gladly respond to at the end of the presentation. So today we have Thierry Escudier, who is based in Paris, who is a strategic consultant for us, and Thomas Verjus, who is currently in Barcelona and who is a global business development manager at Evidentic. I will also let them introduce themselves. And without further ado, Thierry and Thomas, I would say the stage is yours.
Thank you, Thierry H. So I'm Thierry Escudier. I'm very pleased to be with you. Good afternoon and good morning for those on the US side. Now, I've spent my career in the clinical research in a corporate pharma organization, doing clinical research almost all across the world with my team. And so it was a great challenge, as you all know, in clinical operation to set up clinical trial to get, I would say, the patient coming to the study. And therefore, I'm very excited to cover today this new era of the decentralized clinical trial. Beyond, I would say, my clinical operation expertise, I've spent also the last 5 years working on how to engage the patient into the clinical research journey, which I think is a great new, I would say, achievement. Because it's great to consider that the patient are experts of their disease and can help the pharma industry to develop the best studies, to develop the best product. And digital innovation, of course, is a tool that and the possibility that allowed, I would say, the pharma industry to do more efficient clinical trials. So that's what I will try to cover later on, but now I'm passing the floor to Thomas.
Thank you, Thierry, and hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be here today with Thierry and walk you through the wonderful world of DCT, and I hope you will learn a lot. I'm responsible for global business development at Evidentic, the company hosting this webinar today. More especially supporting our life sciences industry and academic partners in our real-world evidence projects, as well as clinical trial optimization projects. And prior to that, I've worked in international environments in healthcare startups and in the life sciences industry as well at Sanofi. So I have the honor to start the presentation, and indeed we will walk you through today DCT, which is a new area for clinical research. But before starting, I think it's great to share a definition of DCT. If you attend today's webinar, it means that you might have already an interest and know about DCT, but it's good to be on the same page. When we talk about decentralized clinical trial, also named as remote trial or virtual trial, it underlines two key elements that we have with this definition from the consulting firms of McKinsey. The first point is that the trial is centered around the patient needs. Indeed, when we talk about decentralized clinical trial and decentralization, it means that instead of having the patient to the site in traditional clinical research. In decentralized clinical trial, we will bring the trial to the patient. And how we will do that, it's because of a combination, it's thanks to a combination of virtual and physical elements. Indeed, we will see it more in details during the presentation, but all decentralization has been allowed thanks to the booming of digital health technologies, allowing to conduct remotely the trial procedures. On the right, we have a very interesting diagram, as you can see, because when we talk about decentralized clinical trial, it's not always fully decentralized. It's most of the time hybrid. It will include some virtual components, because before starting a DCT, and depending on the protocol, the disease area, the context of the intervention, if it's a drug, if it's a medical device, if it's a digital therapeutics, you will be able to virtualize some procedures. If I take the example of multiple sclerosis, for example, it will require some MRI exams that cannot be executed at home, at the home of the patient, but the patient will need to go for the site for this medical follow-up. On the contrary, if we take more dermatology conditions, for example, if there is a follow-up of the skins, we can imagine that the patient could take some pictures and send it through the mobile directly to the investigator. So as you can see, depending on the context, it can be fully decentralized or more hybrid, but the idea is to include virtual components in the clinical trials. I'm sure you've read a lot of articles in the past month showing that DCT is a trending topics among the life sciences industry, and indeed it has been catalyzed by the COVID-19 pandemic. There were already some virtual trials, or some trials including some virtual components, but the pandemic has accelerated, in fact, the adoption of DCT. Because at this time, to prevent the risk of infections for chronic patients, they couldn't go to the site. But at the same time, the industry has to keep a fast pace for drug development. So it has speed up the adoption of DCT at this period. And it's interesting to see beyond the pandemic more elements of context. The pandemic has led to a preliminary regulatory framework for DCT from health authority regulations like the FDA in the US. And all DCT rising is also facilitated by the booming of digital health technology, more especially in the last decades with the mobile web technologies that allow to follow remotely a patient, to communicate directly, to execute different procedures, and then make an easier transmission of the data. Parallel to that, of course, the remote follow-up of the patient and the telehealth help a lot for the adoption of DCT. So there is a rising adoption of DCT, and it's directly translated into figures, as you can see on the right, with a growing market today for DCT. We plan more than 1,000 trials incorporating virtual components for this year. So it will be a growth of 28% comparing to last year, for an estimated market of 1.6 billion. So DCT, hybrid or fully digital, appears definitely as a new gold standard for the life sciences industry. So now I will leave the floor to Thierry to go more in deep and to see why implementing a DCT and how to implement a DCT.
Thank you, Thomas. So as Thomas started to show to you, I would say there is a great interest and a great traction, I would say, from the pharma industry to, I would say, adopt the DCT. And if I try to summarize the, I would say, most benefits that everyone agreed on is, by essence, is of course to reduce the burden and the constraints for the patient. And this is really relying on the patient centricity approach, in considering that the patient are not always in the position due to their health status to move, to go around, and indeed in accepting that some part or all part of a clinical trial could be done at home and not anymore at the study center would reduce the constraints and the burden for the patient. And therefore, you increase the probability of success to enroll the patients, but even more to keep them, because as you know, for those working in clinical operation, it's already hard to enroll the patient, but it's even sometimes harder to keep them. That's what we call the patient retention. And this is really key if you want to have, I would say, a successful trial, because if you have too many dropouts during the trial, then I would say you lose the number of patients you want to have to be able to do your statistical analysis at the end. And that's why that could be, I would say, a very key component of the success to enroll patients more easily. Then one factor also is that we all know that, unfortunately, in a way, most of the patients participating to the clinical trial are almost all living in big cities or around big cities, in the vicinity of the big cities, because this is where there are the big hospital or the I would say the most of the study center, which means that a lot of patients living in more the countryside, and if you think, for example, to country like in the US, with huge distance between, I would say, where they may live in some remote place and the study center in the main cities, that means you, in fact, avoid to have those patients, which is, in a way, less chance for them to have, I would say, access to, I would say, new potential drug, but also you have always the same time of patients. And in doing remote trial, you can have access to a broader diversity of patients. The second benefit is, in particular, when in studies, clinical studies, you have a lot of data collection from the patient themselves. That's what we call the patient-reported outcome. And when they are using electronic device and not anymore paper, we call that ePro. Of course, if you make now your study at the patient home, then you really consider that the center, I would say, of collection is really the patient home, and therefore you make, I would say, the pro even more important. And that's also very important for the patient too, because I do remember some of the studies I've done in the past when we had some anxiety about the number of patients answering to the different patient-reported outcome. And in fact, we were well surprised, because for the patient, it showed to them that we consider them as very important, key, I would say, members of the study, not just as patients, but also because they bring data. And that's why it's so important, if you have to use, I would say, patient-reported outcome, to make them really in the center of your study data collection. Very important also, and I'm really keen to speak about that, is that you engage the patient into the study design and the conduct. That's even more important for the patient engagement and patient centricity, because then you can avoid also to make studies that are not acceptable, because too complex, too heavy procedure, too much, I would say, visit at the hospital. And in making the study more at home, then you reduce those constraints. It's the same like reducing the constraints. But if you engage them early on, you get them as expert of their disease, and therefore it's more successful. And because you are able to recruit faster and you keep more patients, then you are supposed to go faster and increase also the quality of the data, because if you are able to make it in a shorter period of time, you are sure to have, I would say, the best data at the data collection point, but also in terms of the study itself. Excuse me. The technology are available now, and as Thomas said, due to the expansion of the mobile device and the 4G and soon the 5G telecommunication, it has really increased the capacity of collecting data and even video images from anywhere and not just in specific place. So therefore, because the mobile technology is really very much efficient now, with all the telehealth that has been developed, and not just because the COVID, but because it was considered as very helpful, in particular in some remote places in the world where they don't have any even physician to treat the patient, and they can use telehealth to be able to have, I would say, that survey. So in clinical trial, that's also a new component. The increase also of the use of variables, whatever they are, I would say, watch or other type of sensor, is increasing, which is very helpful to collect patient data. And the software also, that is even more now, I would say, active. And if you think about the way we were using EDC 20 years ago, and now the way EDC is used, there is no more question on having, for those who have worked some years ago, we had the offline model and online mode and things like this. So now everyone is collecting data with, I would say, a direct access to the software, and because almost everything is on the cloud. Therefore, on the right side, you have more digital procedure of data collection and of digital, I would say, examination. Communication also is very much easy. You can do remote monitoring. That was even more important during the COVID period. And the data collection is increasing, and very important, I would say, the data quality is even more increased. Excuse me. Very important in our field is the regulatory framework. For those who worked also some years ago, we were all looking at the stage when we were starting to use device with the famous 21 CFR Part 11 from the FDA. Everyone was relying on that piece of regulatory document. And that's the same when we are talking about DCT. So thanks to the regulators, the main one have produced urgent and temporary guidance to help the pharma industry to still continue to conduct clinical trial and to implement clinical trial meanwhile of the COVID. So it was to allow the sponsor to adapt their current protocol to some types of the DCT approaches, which was very important because most of the protocol were not in the DCT mode. And during the COVID period, we had to adapt them and to change and to make amendments to allow the patients still to be able to continue in their trial or to launch some of the new trial. Not all were for the COVID treatment; they were for any other type of disease. But it was important to rely on those regulatory. And it's true that this combination of, unfortunately, the pandemic in one way and the quick turnaround time at the regulators' side has really helped to leverage the use of DCT, as Thomas has shown you. Nevertheless, now pharma is expecting to have more, let's say, definite guidelines that would secure the way they want to conduct DCT. I guess it's coming soon. People are still using, I would say, the temporary guidance that were issued, but we all hope that we'll have soon some of the clear guidance from FDA and EMA. And at the same time, there is also some global industry initiatives, such as the DTRA, that some of you may know, that are working all together with the regulators, the pharma industry, the CRO, and the vendors to accelerate the DCT adoption in working, for example, on the terminology, on the metrics, on the type of organization you want to use when you are implementing a DCT, which I think would be a great help for everyone that is motivated to do a DCT trial. Some of the questions you should ask yourself before starting a DCT, but I would say first, it's like when you start any study, all the clinical trial, even they are based on the same type, trying to find an answer about, I would say, the ratio and the benefit risk between, I would say, taking the drug and not taking the drug, and do you have, I would say, a good ratio between, I would say, and risk balance between the risk and the efficiency of and efficacy of the drug and the safety and so on. But it's still always to think about, you have to design your protocol, you have to choose your center, you have to put in place the study, and you have first to do that before thinking, okay, well, I'm going to start a DCT. The reason is because any studies, as you know, is different. Even this is in the same therapeutic area, even you think, well, that looks like the same, but it's never the same. Because first, the competition is not the same, so you may do a study easily one time, but then because you will do the same study just 2 years after, but because there is the competition with another sponsor, you may have more difficulty to recruit your patients. So asking some question about starting a study is key for the success, and then you have specific question about the DCT itself. So in particular, I think the most important question is the disease area or the therapeutic area. You have to assess if the disease you want to treat, the pathology you want to treat, is really fitting or not with the DCT. Because as Thomas shown on the McKinsey slide, you have some exams that cannot be performed at home, definitely. You have also to think to how to address also your drug to the patient. And if you cannot send the drug for many reasons, depending of the logistical reason, and or about, I would say, the custom reason, things like this, if you are doing a global study across the world, you have to think also about how you would address your drug. But beyond that, it's indeed what is the disease you want to treat. And I have some tips, I would say, to provide you is rare disease can be a very good area, because since it's so hard to find a patient, if you are able to show to them that you will engage them in the design of the study, and that you would allow them maybe not to travel every time to the hospital, to the study center, you may, I would say, ease the recruitment and the retention. Definitely, when in your study you know that the patient that will come have some physical impairment, and or like in CNS, sort of phobia to have people around, in particular if they have to take public transport or things like this. Of course, if you offer them to stay at home, you have more chance to be able to recruit them and to have the patient retention. As I explained earlier on, if you have a lot of real-world data, including PRO, to be collected, of course, this is very important, because since you make, I would say, the central point of data collection at the patient home, it's even more important to be able to offer some flexibility into your study design. And teleconsultation also can be very convenient, in particular when you don't have any invasive, I would say, examination, like in dermatology or in CNS. That would fit perfectly, I would say, a DCT. The second question is about when you design your synopsis and protocol. So for sure, you should think about the DCT component when you write your synopsis, and not when you have finalized your protocol, because that might be far more complex after to be able to change things or to design. My suggestion is that you take your flowchart when you have, I would say, a clear flowchart, and then you match it a little bit like Thomas show with them the McKinsey slide, and you look to what type of exam in your flowchart would fit or not to be done at home, or with study nurse coming at home, And that would help you to design your study more on a full DCT or on hybrid mode. And in particular, you have to think, is it really pragmatic? Is it really realistic to do it? Almost the technology can do anything, but then it has to be pragmatic, because you know that if it's not, then it's going to be even more complex to implement your study. You have also to think of who is really benefiting from it. That is to say, is it more the pharma, because we said it's going to be quicker, so you will get better data collection. The investigator have also key words to say, and the patient, of course, because are they happy with the way you are going to design the study? So that's why embarking, I would say, the patient from the early stage in designing your synopsis protocol is even more important. And also, the last point, but not the least, is that because we'll have a lot of data coming from a lot of different places, you have to be sure that you are able to, let's say, master that new way of data collection and to have, I would say, the proper tool to be able to do that. Let's say the third question you have to ask yourself is how to engage the patient. And I take that, I would say, new FDA guidance for industry, in particular for medical device, where they urge, I would say, pharma sponsor to engage the patient with patient advisor when you want to design and conduct a study in medical device. That's really new because it was in January this year. And I think it's very important that you are able to understand also the way you will link with the patient community. And that's something you have to do as early as possible, as I explained when I was explaining the way to design, I would say, your synopsis, your flowchart, and then your protocol. You will increase, I would say, the acceptance and therefore the speed of conduct. But there are some challenges, of course. So definitely the therapeutic condition may prevent doing DCT, even in hybrid mode. If you think about, I would say, elderly population, I don't think sometimes, I'm not saying they are not able to do it, but you have just to think that if you multiply the number of tools they have to use with password, if they have different, I would say, type of electronic device, it may not be very, I would say, convenient for them. You have also to think about the access to internet. Not all people have access, I would say, to a full speed internet at home. Therefore, if you have to collect data, it's very important that you are sure that everyone will be able to do that. Some of the exams may be mandatory at the hospital. Site organization, because also it's not only just the investigator, but also you have, as you know, the study nurse, and you may have other, I would say, pathologists that will have to look, radiologists. And drug administration, if they are under long supervision, might not be very easy to do that at home. Of course, you have to evaluate the local regulatory ethics and data privacy expectation. And I'm really asking you to think about the e-consent slow adoption, because it was said to be, I would say, a wonderful tool, which is the case. I mean, transforming paper consent into, I would say, e-consent, as you may have experienced yourself, that it's not so well adopted, because in some country, some ethics and or data privacy regulatory, I would say, do not accept, for example, the e-signature. So before starting to think that you can put a full DCT study might be more complex than expected. So that's why when you figure out your study in terms of countries and type of center, you have also to think about that. And the data acquisition strategy, as I said earlier on, you have many data sources. Are you really in a position to deal with it? And that also would save some challenges if you think about it before and not after you have implemented. And now it's to Thomas to explain to you the following.
Thank you, Thierry, for sharing with us the road to implement a DCT. Now time to be more concrete and on explain you at Evidentic how we can support you for full or hybrid DCT. A bit of background about our group. The Evidentic has been formed following the merging of two e-clinical solutions providers on a patient platform 1 year ago. On allowing today to combine existing and unique capabilities to support DCTs. The first pillars of our unique approach is the patient centricity, and that makes us very unique on the market today. As Thierry explained earlier, it's important to engage with patients at early stage of the DCT. And thanks to our direct access to patients, we can generate patient insights to optimize the design of the future clinical trial, to assess feasibility, to test some elements of the protocol directly with patients. Second advantage of this patient centricity approach is that we can speed up recruitment because we will tap into a global patient platform of 500,000 patient and carers across the globe, speeding recruitment across any disease area. And in parallel of that, we are also experts of patient recruitment. And during all the DCT, we will keep engaged also the patient as we do on our own platform. The second pillars, and we have been in the field for several years, is the technologies that we have with our state-of-the-art EDC system, where we have run more than 3,000 studies and clinical research studies, and allowing to collect all the data remotely with the suite of modules, including e-consent in TMF. And last but not least, the last pillar is our data science expertise that we will bring you to support at the different steps of the DCT, from the design to the data management and the analysis of the results through biostatistics to analyze all the data. So as you can see, we have a really patient-centric approach to conduct hybrid or fully digital DCT. But let's see more in details what services we can propose today. So depending on the DCT strategy definition, it will be hybrid or fully digital. And we will help you on the study design, on the patient recruitment, thanks to direct access to our patient platform. We will provide with the software to capture the data. We will be able to manage all the study monitoring remotely. And thanks to our data science, in-house data science expertise, we will support you regarding the biostatistics. And on the right, you have more details about the brick of solutions and services that we combine. I was telling a bit about it, but we have built since 10 years a patient platform with 500,000 patients and carers across 1,000 conditions. So we can have this direct and quick access to patients. We have our own EDC system. So it's one of the best-in-class software and all the module suite also in parallel of this EDC for the different steps of the trials. And finally, the data science expertise to collect, analyze EPRO biomarkers, and conduct all the biostatistics required by the DCT. Complementary to that, we recently partnered also with Field Therapeutics, offering to patients digital therapeutics. And they have a wearable sensor technology that allows us to capture complementary biomarkers through continuing monitoring during the DCT. So if you follow the study flow, it's very interesting to see how we digitalize each phase of the clinical trial. So we talk about it. So patient recruitment, combining the direct access to an existing qualified online patient platform, but also tapping into different channels to recruit online patients on any chronic disease, from high prevalence disease to heart disease. Then we will be able to pre-screen directly the patient to make sure that they will fit into the main inclusion or exclusion criteria of the future trials for an online questionnaire. And once we will have identified eligible patients, we will include the patients through a visit conducted through our e-consent module via telehealth. Then, if they qualify, they will be randomized in the study. And during all the clinical trials, we will collect the different sources of data, e-PROs, e-diaries, but also from our partners through the sensor directly in our electronic data capture system. And we will be able also to conduct the study monitoring through a teleconference module and execute in a well way the DCT. Following that, data management, safety management, and biostatistics, we will take care of these steps and being able, with our data science expertise, to provide all the required deliverables in the right format to conclude the clinical trial. So as you can see, we can cover the different steps, full or hybrid, depending on what virtual components we will include in the study, as discussed earlier. As a conclusion, it's a seamless patient journey, and that's what is very interesting. What is unique is this direct to patient access. Complementary to that, the full remote tools that we propose through e-consent, e-COA sensors to capture the different data, all collected in our state-of-the-art EDC and analyzed through our data science expertise. And all this seamless patient journey allow to, and it's complementary and to the benefits shared by Thierry, optimize the clinical trial design, being more patient-centric, accelerate the patient recruitment, and improve also accessibility to clinical trials, and more especially remove geographic constraints, and especially very interesting to specific patient population. Then during the trial, it will optimize the patient retention through a remote monitoring. In the end, reduce study cost by digitalizing some procedures and ensure data quality. And this is more especially interesting as you know, we are in the area of personalized medicine that requires complex sources of data, and that we will be able also to capture. So I think you had a good overview of how we can support you with DCT and also on the different key steps to follow to implement a successful DCT. I'm sure you have many questions now, and I will leave the floor to Thierry H.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Thierry, for this presentation. It was very insightful for me. We do have indeed some questions that did come in. So the first one I have here is, for a first study to implement, would you recommend to start a hybrid model or to go from scratch to a full DCT? So Thomas, Thierry.
I may take this one. Yeah, this is a good question. So I think it's really depending on really the disease you want to treat, as I explained. Because if you are listening to some of the experts in the field, some say you have absolutely to go to full DCT, because if you do sort of lukewarm intermediate solution, you will never, I would say, benefit from the full DCT. But at the same time, if you are experienced in clinical research and in clinical operation, you know that it's far more complex to have something on paper in your mind, designing a study on protocol and then putting it in place. Because then when you are going out of, I would say, your pharma company or your CRO company, you know that all the different type of center might be different from one country to the other country. But if you consider that it's not anymore going to the hospital, but it's at patient home, and you multiply by the number of, I would say, patients the complexity. So that means if you have 200 patients, you will have almost 200 small study center at patient home, but still you have, of course, to connect with the true investigator. So my point is that I think it's really depending of if some of the components, some of the exam you have are so easy to be performed at home that you could use even some study nurse, for example, depending of the country, that you know also that your disease will benefit, or not the disease, sorry, your study will benefit of having DCT component because it will reduce the burden of the patient, then definitely for sure, let's go for, we'll recommend to go for an hybrid. But then if you think there is really no reason, and in particular because your study would accept it, then you could try a full DCT, even for the first study, as far as you will do it with a partner that can really explain to you and accompany you, I would say, to avoid all the traps and the challenges.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, well, we have another question. I think that was very clear, Thierry. Thank you. Another question that do come in is, how long does it take to involve the patients and study protocol design? Do you have an average range time depending on the study area or disease area?
I can take this one, Thierry. It's a very interesting question. This will depend on the methodology that we will set up for that, because there are always some timeline constraints. The beauty of the platform that we have is that we have a quick and direct access across any chronic disease to patients. So we can run very quick surveys through our patient live platform. So it's 5 poll questions on getting answers from patients across different chronic disease, including oncology, for example, within 2 days. And also, if we want to set up a larger quantitative study, it would take 2 to 3 months to collect insights from patients. After, the impact is depending on the countries that we will involve in the study, and also the number of respondents and the disease that we will target. It will require more time if we go to rare disease comparing to diabetes, for example.
And thank you, Thomas. And I may add something because I'm a true, let's say, patient advocate in a way. That's why also you should think about how engaging your patient, but far before trying to implement a DCT trial or even any clinical study. If you are really considering the patient as a potential expert and that will help you to design the best study to get, I would say, the best drug, if you do that in advance, that is to say, if you set up the relationship with the patient, you have put in place, for example, any contract that would allow you to discuss in full transparency but full confidence with your patient organization. In particular, if you work in some always in the same disease area, then you are even more able, I would say, to put that in place far in advance, which means that once you have to design a new study, then you don't start to think, okay, well, now I would like to contact a patient, but I don't know how to do it, and therefore you lose time. And very often what happens is that you think, well, I can escape from that, so I don't connect with patient, which I think is a mistake. So if you have done that upfront, far in advance, to help you even in, I would say, the design of your development of a new compound, then you would save time. And thanks, for example, to the system that we can use at Evidentic, as Thomas said, you can be very quick if you need to have a very quick, I would say, answer to some of the questions. And that shouldn't be, I would say, an issue to go to the patient, I would say, level to get the best expertise.
Okay. Well, thank you, Thierry. So we still have 4 questions here in total. So how do we confirm patient diagnosis?
Thomas, you want to start, or I'm doing it?
Yeah, I can start definitely. Regarding DCT, the diagnosis of the patient is firstly confirmed through self-reported patient data at the first step regarding the pre-screening questionnaire. And of course, there is an inclusion visit before the patient can participate in the study. And this is conducted remotely with investigators, where we will confirm the diagnosis during this visit.
Okay.
And once again, also, it's really depending if, for example, you are in a rare disease area. I would say the patients are almost known already because they are so rare. So therefore, I would say the diagnosis is well known. But I want to clarify something. It doesn't mean that when you want to put in place a DCT, you don't work anymore with the investigator team. Not at all. Of course, you still need them to be able to do the work, which is even more important. That is to say, the trust that a patient would put in the words, I would say, of an investigator, because it's still the investigator that will propose, I would say, to the patient to do a study. It's not the pharmacist. So the way you would, I would say, be able to establish the diagnosis will be still relying, I would say, at the investigator level, and we don't want absolutely not to take any of the responsibility. It's more offering more convenience, I would say, for the patient, but the investigator, they still have their key role to play into that game, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Thierry, for clarifying this. So another question we do have is, what about quality of data? Many articles show that RBM studies have poor data quality at the end.
Okay, I may take this one. So I'm not aware about those publications about the risk-based monitoring data quality. That's something a little bit different. I mean, the risk-based monitoring, when it was established, was a clarification from the regulators to explain to pharma that they never said that regulators were expecting pharma and CRO to do 100% of source document verification. And it was sort of a shock because I think everyone that started to work 20 years ago, we all thought that it was to be done. And if you think about, indeed, the quality of the monitoring, it's not because you verify 100% of all the source document that you get a better quality. Because in doing 100%, you don't really focus on what is mattering, what is important. So I think the risk-based monitoring is an efficient tool to help both pharma, CRO, and as an investigator to focus on what is really important. And it's not because you do that sometimes with central monitoring, that is to say you have people working from the office doing a different job between clinical operation and data management, that you will get better or I would say not better data quality. I think it's really depending on the complexity of the system. And it's true that I've seen some very sophisticated system of risk-based where sometimes maybe the CRA, the monitors were a little bit lost because they did not know exactly what they should look. And if you think also about what I said regarding the investment and the engagement of the patient, if the patient think they have a high value in what they say, they would be even, I think, more compliant to fill in, I would say, their questionnaire and any, I would say, documents, because then they think that indeed what they say will have, I would say, a very important value for their own life and the life of the other, I would say, patients. So I wouldn't consider that in doing DCT, we would get, I would say, less data quality. Even I think we should get better data quality.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So another one here, a wider question. So can you share any practical example of DCT?
Sure. So Thomas, the work we are doing with maybe with Phil.
Yeah, definitely. We are currently investigating depression and mental health. So this is a good example of a disease area where it's easy to have virtual components in the study on the different procedure. Firstly, because when you recruit the patient, most of the patients are mainly follow-up, not at the investigator, not at the site, and not at the hospital, but by liberal physicians. So that's easier to recruit online. And secondly, as Thierry mentioned earlier, it's more convenient for these patients to have a full remote process, and it's increase also the retention during the study. Plus, thanks to some wearables, sensor, it's easier also to conduct some medical follow-ups and capture data linked to the mental health context. So that's very good practical examples where DCT is fully adapted regarding the disease area on the patient population.
And even also, if you think to what we were able to do already almost 20 years ago with some of the vendors at that time, I can think about PHT or CRF Health or many other. I mean, they were doing already part of DCT in the sense that offering the data collection for ePro in using at that time, I would say, Palm Pilot, so the ancestor, I would say, of the BlackBerry and then of the iPhone. But already 20 years ago, we were able to collect data from patients, not anymore on paper, but still already, I would say, on digital device. And it was part of the DCT mode, even it was only a few components. But so that means it's already possible for years. But of course, with the increase of the access to the mobile technology with the 4G and soon 5G, and the fact what we call the bring your own device, that is to say you can now say to the patient, don't worry about having an extra phone, you can use your mobile phone and we will be able to put an apps. It's even more easy to do at least hybrid than the full DCT, as we said, is requiring a little bit more review of your flow chart and what can be really pragmatic and what is not pragmatic.
Okay, thank you, Thierry. I think we still have 2 questions to go, so we'll be right on time, I think. So here it goes. Is there any country where DCT cannot work, and for which reasons?
Well, I think it's depending of the legislation, regulation, custom. It's maybe complex sometime in some of the country, but things are changing so rapidly. Also due to the pandemic, what was not possible in some country has become possible, and it may really depends of the, I would say, technology adoption of mobile phone, for example. And it's true that it seems that even in most of the emerging countries, the number of people who have a mobile phone is really increasing. So it's not anymore a question of the access to the mobile phone, but it would be more a question about the access to the full speed of internet, because you want to transfer a lot of data. So that may really depends of not sometimes even the country, but the zone. I'm thinking about the US. For those who have traveled into the US, I mean, if you are in remote place, in the deep, I would say, center of the US, you may not have access, I would say, to the full internet speed. So it's not just a question of country, but it may be a question of the zone where you want really to work. And that's why you have really to carefully assess your feasibility study, because since you want to expand the number of patients that are not living in the big city, you take the risk also to put your study in jeopardy if you are not sure that people will be able to access to the data, I mean, to the data center and being able to send the data. So that's why you have really to, even more than with a normal, I would say, flow chart, you have really even more to think about your feasibility, and you have to be helped with people who know whatever is the vendor, was the technology and or the CRO, but also the investigator that may know very well the area. So I guess you can do almost DCT in most of the country, but still consider, for example, for the e-consent adoption, you still have country where the e-signature is not accepted. So at least that put you, I would say, a small trap into your journey, because if you want to put a full DCT but you cannot have the e-signature, then you still have to get, I would say, a paper signed. So you have to take that into consideration.
Okay. So here is, I think we had a lot of questions here. We are getting through them. So here is the last one that I have. So what are the main risks to anticipate to implement a DCT?
But the main risk, I think, is, as I said, I mean, you may be very enthusiastic, and you may even have, I would say, a good vendor that will help you. But still, because you want to expand, I would say, your operation to the different patient home, if you already think that when implementing a normal clinical trial with all the different type of center you may have across the world, then you increase even the complexity. So that could be, I would say, the highest risk. And also, if you think, well, okay, that type of population you want to address is supposed to be very internet user-friendly and very technology savvy, but it's sometimes not so true, and therefore the benefit of the DCT might be, I would say, altered by the fact that patients will not be able to enter the data. So that's the risk, and that's why you have really to focus on the study flow chart, the different piece of it, and discussing with the patient association expert upfront that would help you to really understand, because the patient really know the best, I would say, the disease, and would be able to say, well, that's not possible to use, I would say, such type of technology.
Okay, well, I think that's it. Thank you, Thierry. Thank you, Thomas. We went through all the questions. I think that was a very interactive and interesting session. For all the people still online, I would say thank you for attending. And if you want, of course, more insights and in-depth details about our Evidentic DCT solutions, feel free to get in touch with us, and we will tell you all about it. So again, I would say thanks, and have all a great day. Thanks for attending, and hopefully see you and speak to you soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.